Howdy, everyone. I am continuing, of course, to make some slow progress on this canopy and getting it fitted. Like I said many times before, it's not necessarily hard work, it's just tedious. And if you're very meticulous about the details, there are a lot of details to concern yourself with. So, just a few more observations. I've got the canopy now fitted and drilled and temporarily screwed down along the rear frame here. Now, when backing up a little bit, when you initially fit this canopy stuff together, the framing together, you have spacers between the canopy frame here and this fatter roll bar here. You put spacers between the two to set them off from one another all the way around. And of course, that gets clamped, and then you build your frame off of that, which is what I have done, of course. I have my side skirts or my temporary side skins on. I'll talk about those in a minute, but so you can't see the spacers that are underneath the rail, those 1/8-inch spacers that are underneath the rail behind the skin. When you have all that set up and clamped together, then you build and rivet your frame. So then what I had done, as I had talked about before, this back frame here that attaches to the canopy, it had a little bit of a curve to it. If it was not clamped, it wanted to stand off a little bit. You know how aluminum is. It flexes all over the place. The splice plate here, this plate that attaches these two halves together, that is still just Cleco. That does not get permanently riveted for a little while still. So there's some play in this whole structure. So with the spacers in place, of course, I clamp it together so that this frame runs nice and straight and true in relation to the roll bar and to the back edge of the canopy, right? You want all that to be straight and parallel and true to one another. So at that point, that's when I marked my locations for the screws, and I drilled the screws and installed them. One big thing I have to say, I have to back up and say that I was 100% wrong when I said that these holes get tapped. The roll bar here gets drilled and tapped, obviously, because you can't get to it. It's a solid piece. It's not solid, but it's a boxed piece. And it does have a reinforcement strip inside of it. So this material here is nice and thick. This has to be drilled and tapped for the window. These screws, these are all through holes because you can get to the back side of the frame. So these are all through holes with nuts and washers. So I took care of that. I enlarged the holes. They're now through holes, and I've got temporary nuts on the back sides holding this in place. Now that I've done that, I've got the frame done, of course. I've got the pneumatic actuators, if you will, in place. Actually, they're not actuators, but the struts are in place. I've got the through holes drilled. I've got the screws temporarily in place. I still have my spacers underneath here, but I took off these spacers in here and everything is unclamped, so I can move the canopy a little bit. So here are the observations. Since unclamping everything and putting the lift struts in place, you can see where the canopy edge is, and you can see where my reference line is. So it has pulled it forward a little bit. Of course, the line is probably not perfectly straight, and the back edge of this canopy is not perfectly straight. So you can see it's pretty consistent. The distance between the aft edge of the canopy and my reference line is pretty consistent all the way around. There are some variations. Let me go to the other side. You can see here, there quite a bit closer together, and then as you go up it widens a little bit, but it's fairly consistent all the way around, and it's about 1/8 of an inch. It's nothing to lose sleep over because, one, I think the majority of the shift, well, I don't know that for sure, I'm not going to say that, but the canopy still operates just fine. I have those jack screws inside here attached to the frame to make sure that things don't get pushed too far forward. I think that helps a little bit. But I did all of my skin adjustments here for clearance so that the canopy can open and close. I had done those with the struts in place, if I remember correctly, or I at least test fitted it with the struts in place. So there's not a clearance issue anymore up front, even though the gap is a lot bigger than I'd like it to be. But that's okay. It's just an observation that everybody has said it in the past, and I'm going to say it again, that as you go through the build, nothing is set in stone. This thing moves all over the place. But like I said, I'm not losing sleep over it because this was just a reference mark to mark the center of the roll bar. You can see, even though this has moved forward a little bit, the canopy itself overlaps the roll bar quite a bit. You can see that right here. You can see how much that overlaps the roll bar. When I had done the rough cut of the window, I had left a lot of material on this back side because I had planned on something like this potentially happening. With a lot of extra material on this back side, I can very easily take this whole window and shift it forward 1/8 of an inch to close this gap. I'm not worried about my reference line anymore. Since this has been cut and the window has been cut, I don't care about the reference line. The only reason I'm leaving this tape on here is because I want something here to hopefully not scratch the canopy or the window more than I have to. And I have my reference lines on here, which are lined up with the screws on the canopy, which I talked about in another video. As far as this reference line goes, I don't need that anymore because now I'll just fit the window to the back edge of the canopy. So I'm good with that. Is it perfect? No. I would really like this back edge to come back to this line the way it was originally, but I'm okay with it. Now I can reach up underneath here and pull it back like that. But I don't know if you can hear that noise. You hear that thumping when I let go of it? What's happening is it's lifting the front edge of the canopy. See that? Which I obviously don't want. So in theory, I could pull that back so that it's back to my reference line, right? And then at that point, I can drill my holes through the side frame, through the side skin, into the canopy, put all those screws in, and then that would lock it in place. I could take my clamps off, and this would be aligned up here, and I'd have all my screws in place here. This would be locked in place. But as you can see, that would open up a gap up front here, which I don't like. And the biggest thing is, of course, that induces stress on the canopy. Because now I'm pulling it back and clamping it, and while it's held in place, I'm putting this drilling and putting screws in here. So when you unclamp it, where does that stress go? It goes into the canopy itself through these screws here. Then you've got a gap up front that you have to deal with. And I don't want that. I want the canopy to be stress-free, and it is right now, because it's basically just laying there with screws along the back, which is what I want. You can see my gaps up here haven't really changed. If anything, they've improved. There's pretty much nothing here now. There's still a little bit here. You can see my reference line is still perfect. And there's a little bit here. But it's not bad. It's as good as it's going to get. Of course, like I said, I'm working with my temporary side skins. I'm not going to use these. I'm going to remake these. I see my battery's getting low again, so I'll make this quick. But with these side skins on, again, you can see my reference line here. If I put it in the camera frame, you will. You can see my reference line here in relation to the bottom of my skin. And again, there's a gap there. So this whole frame has come up a little bit. And that's because when I clamp this frame to the canopy, as the canopy rests on the roll bar, when I clamp this frame to it to drill these holes, I brought the frame up to the canopy. So it lifted this entire frame in the back a little bit. It's not that big of a deal because when I install this permanently, I'm going to have tank sealant underneath here. So if I put that tank sealant in here a little bit on the thick side, it will let this bar, this frame, sit lower, which will close up this gap a little bit. Plus, when I put my latching ears in on the back side of this frame, and when I lock the canopy closed, those ears will engage with the latch mechanism and that will pull it down a little bit. So again, just an observation, not concerned about it, not going to lose sleep over it. But again, just keep in mind, nothing is etched in stone. I don't care what you do with this canopy and how you approach it. Every time you do something, it's going to shift and move around on you. Just keep that in mind and try to plan for it. So next up for me, I've got more aluminum coming. I'm going to remake these side skins. They're basically going to be exactly the same as you see here, but I'm going to do this front part a little bit different to close up this area. And that will be it. My plan for the front is I'm just going to use fuel tank sealant. I don't know that I'll have any kind of actual fairing. I think I'm just going to clean this up with some fuel tank sealant, seal it, attach it with the fuel tank sealant, and just kind of use that as my fairing. But I am going to remake these side skins. At that point, I'll have to lay out my holes to go through the skins and through the canopy and drill all those and bolt those in place. And then after that, it will be time to actually install it permanently with fuel tank sealant and the correct hardware. So that's it. I'm going to cut this off now before I get cut off because my battery's dying. And I will talk to you guys here shortly.